This is what Ecclesiastes is intended to do. Verse 1 says that the author is the teacher, but he's more like a good psychologist because he asks a lot of probing, deep, perennial, existential questions without giving a lot of answers. He just asks questions. That's how Socrates taught his students. It's called the Socratic method. You just ask questions that force the people you're teaching to think on their own, to probe on their own, not giving answers, but asking questions. So this psychologist, this teacher forces us to think through things like meaning and purpose and identity and existence. Those sorts of things that, quite honestly, we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about. We're busy, our lives are noisy, our lives are filled with distractions and things to do. We're preoccupied with the surface of things, and so we don't typically stop long enough to ask the deeper questions about meaning. Why am I here? What is life all about? Why is it that I feel the things that I feel when this happens or that happens? We don't tend to ask those questions, but Ecclesiastes won't allow us to get away with not asking those questions. Ecclesiastes forces us to ask those questions. He asks questions that push us to look beyond the noise we harness to drown out the pain, that inner hollowness that we so often feel, those voids that we so often try to fill, oftentimes with good things. A key to understanding Ecclesiastes, I would go so far as to saying the key to understanding Ecclesiastes is to understand the phrase under the sun. That phrase appears 29 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And what the writer means by the teacher, the psychologist, what he means when he uses the phrase under the sun, what he's describing the way life and this world functions and feels if there is no God. And this life and this world is all that there is. That's what under the sun is describing. It's describing the way this world functions, the way this world feels if there is no God, and the way this life and this world, if this life and this world is all that there is, then all that we have exists under the sun. Not above, but under the sun. And he concludes that if this world is all there is, everything is meaningless. A lot of people misunderstand Ecclesiastes as if this melancholic psychologist, this despairing psychologist is simply saying, nothing matters. Nothing matters. Everything's meaningless. Nothing in this world matters. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, if there is no God and if this life and this world is all that there is, then everything is meaningless, he says. Even atheists who are bold enough to be honest have admitted that without God, life is meaningless. One of my favorite philosophers was a 20th century philosopher by the name of Jean-Paul Sartre. He was French, and he was born, I think, in 1905, and I think he died in 1980. He's one of the very few people, I think one of two, that when given the Nobel Peace Prize, refused to accept it. He had his reasons for whatever that is. But he was an atheist, and he was honest. He was bold. He tended to be more bold than a lot of Christians claim to be. And he said this in his book, Existentialism and Humanism. God does not exist, and we have to face the consequences of this. It is very distressing to me that God does not exist because all possibility of finding value and meaning in a heaven of ideas disappears with him. Dostoevsky said, if God didn't exist, everything would be permissible. This is the very starting point of existentialism, and as a result, man is lost because neither within him nor without does he find anything ultimate to cling to. That's honest. And he's right. He's absolutely right. If God does not exist, the only place where I detour from Jean-Paul Sartre is his conclusion that God does not exist. But if you take what he's saying to heart, that if God does not exist, everything is meaningless, he's right. There's nothing ultimate to cling to. There's nothing transcendent. There's nothing above the sun. And that's what Ecclesiastes is describing, what life and this world feels like and how it functions if God does not exist.